I'm now about to introduce possibly one of my favorite television personalities of all time. The wonderful Deborah Meaden is here. And she doesn't really need an introduction, but she is obviously of Dragon's Den fame. She's going to be moderating the next panel, so prepare for a very good one. She will challenge entrepreneurs to talk about how they are changing the way that we generate, connect to, and use energy. We're going to hear from energy and tech innovators who are leading a global energy revolution that could be bigger than the internet. So Deborah, over to you.
I ran. I'm very excited to be here. So afternoon, everyone. I am actually genuinely excited to be here. I wish you had had a microphone in our conversation out the back, because that was definitely worth recording. Really fascinating stuff. So we have a brilliant panel to talk to this afternoon. So their names are up there, but I'm actually going to ask them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they do. I have it written on a piece of paper, but I think it's going to come to life a lot more if you explain it yourself. So this is Amrit Chandan, founder of Octopus Energy, the world's most sustainable lithium battery. What's that all about?
Thank you so much, Deborah. Yes, I'm Amrit, CEO and co-founder of Acceleron, and we want to solve the waste challenge that exists within the electronics industry, particularly in the battery space. So for us, it's about sort of making sure that we extract all the value that goes into producing a battery, which typically sort of never meets sort of the full life that it's capable of, because it's discarded before it needs to be. So how can we make that the most sustainable and therefore extract as much value from it as possible?
That sounds fantastic. And Didem and Atesh, you're VIP, you are VIP, but you're VP AI Strategy and Innovation at Schneider Electric. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you so much. So I determine our AI and generative AI these days strategy across the company. We started with internal functions, and of course we'll be looking at external activities as well. Thank you. I joined 3 months ago after 11 years with Microsoft, always in the AI space.
And Caroline Cochrane co-founded and is Chief Operating Officer of Oclo Inc. Listen, your description contained the words fission, and I thought I'm going to leave that up to you now, because I wasn't very good at physics.
Yeah. Yes, Caroline Cochrane, co-founder of Oclo Inc. We use advanced fission to power clean power plants. Fission is the reaction that powers nuclear power plants. We call it advanced because it allows us to have inherent safety characteristics to even use nuclear waste as fuel. So it's a very exciting space to be in.
So the big question, the topic today is green energy, the huge revolution. Is it going to be the size of the revolution that we've seen in terms of the internet? About 20 years of the internet has completely changed the way we live, the way we work. It's reached into all parts of the world. Are we facing the same revolution? I'm going to ask you that question, Didem, because I guess working with AI, you spend a lot of time looking into the future and predicting what you see.
Thank you so much. Well, if we look at internet's expansion first, we had the booms, we had the bust, we had Amazon. Really, it took a while to change our lives, but it was also on a daily basis, it was also quite fast. I think the same will happen as we all move on to become prosumers, generating energy, consuming energy, selling, and so on. And I couldn't be more confident that technologies like AI, generative AI, will accelerate that. So that's the good news. But of course, we also need to make sure the technologies are implemented, used responsibly, sustainably, frugally, as we say in our space.
And Caroline, how do you see the future? Do you see it as this big, huge revolution of change?
Absolutely. I think the title of this panel is very timely, and it's good to highlight how huge this is. I think it's easy to say, oh, electricity use is growing, we need it to be more clean. But it's like, no, electricity use is going to triple in a few decades, triple global electricity production. And AI is changing how data centers even work. And so data centers and similar kind of facilities are already one of the biggest electricity consumers in the world right now. And so I think that nexus of energy and talking about AI, having you on this panel, it couldn't be more timely. And I think the urgency and the massive scale is even hard to comprehend.
And Amrit, do you have this same vision of this massive revolution?
Yes, absolutely. We have to change the way we do things. Ultimately, we're using the same infrastructure that's been in place since the Victorian times in the UK. There is so much opportunity to change things. One of my favorite quotes is, it's a Native American saying, which is, we borrow the resources of future generations. And the way that the current energy infrastructure is set up, it's all about burning fossil fuels, using sort of yesterday's technology to produce the power that we live with. This isn't about creating a long-lasting legacy for many future generations to enjoy all of the benefits that we have enjoyed as well. So if we want that future, not for many generations' time, but for our children and our grandchildren, we need to change the way we're doing things. And so just by that very nature, this revolution has to happen.
So speaking of that, we're facing a blooming population, and a population that is going to want more and more energy. We're consuming more and more energy. So do we think that we're fit for that, and how are we going to achieve being able to service those needs at the same time as reducing our planetary impact, actually trying to reach our targets, our net zero targets. Caroline, how do you feel? How confident do you feel, and how do you feel we're going to be able to do that?
That exact reason is why I'm in the space that I'm in, is because nuclear power has shown the ability to rapidly decarbonize a industrialized nation that is France, so in a matter of decades. And we see China now investing heavily. They're building 50 plus nuclear power plants. And when it comes to rapidly scaling up in an emission-free manner, that's the only path that I see is for that to play a huge role. And to me, it's very important to utilize the energy with the lowest life cycle carbon footprint for this 8 billion people that we have, and maybe even, I think there's projections that 10 is about what the Earth is going to head toward and probably stay steady at. So 10 billion people and tripling our electricity use in 30 years, we gotta, really go for things that are massively energy dense, the lowest possible life cycle carbon footprint. And so I have some optimism, but it's a daunting future to meet.
We need optimism. This is good.
Yeah.
And Dem, do you think this is doable? I mean, it does feel like those targets diverge, doesn't it? We need more energy. We need to decarbonize the economy. Do you think that is achievable?
I definitely think so, because I think we sit in a sweet spot, right? We do know digitalization is the way to go, electrification is the way to go, and in all those sometimes contradictory forces, my space, I would like to think, helps a lot, because it's all about data. It's all about sustainability first mindset. I would say it's never about technology. I've been in disruptive technology space for 25 years right now. Technology is usually not it's the mindset. It's the people, the culture. And if we can accelerate that, I think we'll have higher chances of success.
And Amrit, are you confident? Are you optimistic?
I think we have no choice but to be optimistic. Otherwise, we end up giving in to just, corrosive cynicism, I guess. I think it's so important that we try to shape what we do. We have this once-in-a-generation lifetime, or once-in-a-generation sort of opportunity to just reshape everything. We've had so many once-in-a-generation events happen over the last sort of 20 years or so, but we have the opportunity to not just think about financial return with everything we do, but also environmental return and societal return. And if we can get all of those things working together, we create a generative system which is suitable for the future and deserves to have a place for the future. And I think we can get there because we have all the tools, and ultimately we have no choice but for the survival of the future to do that.
And we're in a transition period at the moment, aren't we? I mean, what are the challenges, do you think, that we face that are actually, what are the barriers to us speeding up this transition? And I guess much more important, how can we overcome the challenges?
I think that there's definitely a need for individual action, but there's also a need for systemic action as well. So how can we make it as simple as possible? And to Didem's point as well, the technology is just a tool. So how can we make the tool as easy to use as possible so that it becomes an absolute no-brainer to make that change? Because ultimately, what people don't want to do is vote for a future where the standard of living decreases and the way that we have to exist decreases. We still want to see that progress happen. The only way to achieve that growth is through sustainability-powered means.
And Didem, do you see the same barriers? Do you see the same approach?
Absolutely. I mean, we were discussing this before the panel. I do think that data mindset, monitoring, measuring progress. Yes, digital transformation, using AI to predict stuff or etc. That's all good, but it really starts with humans. It starts with culture, the mindset of sustainability first, impact first, doing things the right way.
And Caroline, do you see a mindset of sustainability first, or do you think that's something we really need to work on? It's actually quite difficult. So it's a difficult question sometimes because when you sit in a room like this, it's wonderful. It's a tonic. You walk around the world thinking, oh, this is so hard, and then you meet people like the people who fill this room, and you think that we can do this. But generally, do you think that more needs to be done to engage people?
I do think that the broader populace is caring and worried enough about climate change and the environment and seeing the changes happening around them. They are pushing some of the biggest energy consumers to make commitments that are really important. But I think for those commitments to follow through, it's just like what Amrit was saying, it has to be a no-brainer. It has to economically make sense. I think people will be willing to pay a little bit of a premium for clean energy, but you can't even ask. I think another question is how much can you even ask developing world to pay extra when they just want energy for lights on at night or genuine human needs. So I think it has to be economically make sense as well as be clean. And so that's one of our goals, but I think there's a lot of ways to get economic and clean energy out to people as quickly as possible, like what several of us are all working on.
Yeah, because it's true. People don't like change, do they? Whatever the change is, people are concerned about it. So if it costs a little bit more, there's a double reason not to change the behaviour. Whereas if you can say there's a real benefit to you. And talking about that, switching a mindset from saying this is a big problem that is going to be really hard to face. What are the opportunities in there? I'm an entrepreneur. You're entrepreneurs. So what do you think the opportunities are, Amrit?
Yeah, this is a time full of opportunity because every challenge ultimately is absolutely an opportunity. And I think to the point of, how do we turn this from being a negative thing into a positive thing? People ultimately, we need to get away from this idea that the government's going to solve the problem or is going to be solved through our tax pounds or dollars. Because ultimately, the money that a government can mobilize to solving this it pales in comparison to what business can do. And business can be such a force for good if we can motivate it in the right way and get the outcome happening in the right way. So, one of the most basic examples of the opportunity is helping big companies to decarbonize. $100 per ton of carbon, it's already $1 trillion industry if it can be sort of sought after, and that's a massive opportunity for so many businesses out there to take advantage of.
Well, I guess you, Caroline, you are there. You are taking the opportunity. How challenging has that been for you? Is the world ready for it? Or are you facing barriers when you present brand new ideas to solve these huge problems?
Well, we do have the benefit of having been around for a few years, and I'd say it's changed over these years. So we started 10 years ago, and I think 10 years ago, the attitudes were more like, oh, maybe, in the future. I think the attitude now of just everyone, everywhere, we're based in America. Here, we've been to conferences around Europe, and I think the urgency of needing clean power and as soon as possible has changed that dynamic. But to your prior question, which is, how can we do this fast, all of us? I think societal and political structures are not set up for massive and quick action on energy. Renewable projects in the United States, for example, are taking 10 years to connect to the grid. Nuclear power projects obviously take quite a while, and a lot of that's regulatory infrastructure. So I think that urgency is going to have to translate into political and societal structures in a way that allows for this quick change. And sometimes people use the phrase like moonshot or something. We have to recognize that we're in a global fight for something huge that needs to happen quickly.
And Didem, you work for a big organisation. Are you finding the mood in there changing? I mean, I don't know. Is Schneider, do you consider it an entrepreneurial organisation in any event? And are you finding the speed and the mood changing within a huge organisation?
Absolutely. I feel actually very proud to work for a company like Schneider Electric. I have tried to learn the most. In fact, I just met with Schneider Ventures before joining this meeting, and the amount of energy, the focus, the partnership efforts, the ecosystem uplifting efforts are fantastic. It's quite admirable. And you were asking about the opportunities. I'll be a bit selfish. There are many opportunities, of course, but if you could come to us for sustainable AI, frugal AI, how to do things, yes, let's use AI, but how to make sure it is also done in a responsible, frugal way, we will be able to do so much more. And there are tons of programs for that, initiatives in the company, both from a startup support perspective, but also from a partnership perspective, like in terms of channels and so on. So sky is the limit.
So more collaborations. Are you seeing that happen?
Absolutely.
Okay, and what about access to capital, money? Because that, it's quite important. Is it still a barrier? Is it still a barrier?
I think definitely it's still a barrier. It's particularly sort of in the UK investment scene. It's definitely a challenge, and that's mostly because of the market conditions at the moment. So the interest rates have increased, and everything just becomes so much harder in times of economic difficulty, because then everyone's tightening their belts and want to sort of focus on the shortest term opportunities. But I think there's also a lot of goodwill out there as well. There's a lot of funds that have gone specifically into ESG related activities, into wanting to sort of help. And we're going to enter a situation pretty soon where there's a lot of capital available, but it's not being invested. And it has to be invested because those fund managers have been given that money to invest. And so I expect in the next couple of months there will be this big bang of investment that will take place, and hopefully it will fund projects that are truly having a meaningful impact and not just sort of greenwashing away. So yeah, definitely capital can be difficult to access, but I think it will get better.
And are you finding investors knowledgeable and open-minded enough about your proposition? I mean, it's yes, it's batteries, but it's different, So I guess for an investor to invest, they've got to have an open mind to it, and they've got to understand enough about it. Is that an issue?
I think it depends on the type of investor. So traditional investors are much more difficult to convince, but there are more and more investors who are becoming interested in this space because, again, they have to. And there's a lot of, you take European legislation, for example, even though technically the UK is out of Europe, the European legislation we still have to comply with. And so there's sustainable financial reporting directives that need to be met. And so there's this requirement that funds have to show how their capital is being deployed sustainably. And that also extends to corporations as well. It's not just in the financial sector, but companies, especially over sort of 250 people, or the metrics that define a large company, have to report on their progress towards net zero and what they're actually doing. And that's coming even more, just like GDPR kind of came with a bang. That legislation is going to get tighter and tighter. So I think that will really help unlock a lot of capital in the space.
And Caroline, am I right? Are you operating in the US?
Yes.
How does what you've heard compare with your experience? Mm-hmm. Is it difficult to raise capital for these, the green energy kind of sector?
Yeah, I think there's several factors at play here. I think in the last 15 years, some new mechanisms for raising funds for startups have really been helpful for what I'd call like capitally intensive hard tech, not software, but physically intensive companies. So like safe notes, I think have been very beneficial because you don't have to raise a priced round in the traditional old-fashioned method. And I think that really changed the landscape in the last 10, 15 years. especially in America. And I think over the last like 5 to 10 years, it's gone more global. I'd be interested to hear, but maybe offline. But I think, I think it's fairly global. What Imrat was saying, though, is that the drop in investment of capital since like 2021, 2022 is just pretty abysmal. So like I'm hoping that people start getting that flowing a little bit better. We've been fortunate, but it is hard to get to your question, which was a really good question. Investors want to invest in things they understand. So doing due diligence on new things is hard, and it's been hard. Certainly throughout the years for us, we've been pretty fortunate in our capital position. And now we've made an announcement about using a SPAC to go public to raise capital in that manner. So we're maybe seeing that more in our rearview mirror, but it is hard in that sense of investors want to know a space before they invest in it. So doing due diligence on new things is always hard, and hard tech items need a fair amount of capital. So that's amplified.
And I guess they also want evidence. So when by the very nature of it, when you're at the forefront of change, it's much more difficult. Does Schneider invest in and partner with other organisations? So do you recognise the words that are being said? What's the mood within Schneider?
Yeah, first of all, thank you both so much, because I was more thinking along the lines of, okay, things have changed so much in the last 1 or 2 years from an energy cost perspective that the picture has hopefully improved in terms of payoffs for the investments, how long the investments take, and then how long the return takes. So that picture has changed positively, of course, for all of us. And technologies like AI, etc., accelerate that return on investment or time to value. So I was a bit more optimistic, but yeah, definitely I hear you. So thank you for those insights.
And Deborah, if you're sort of on that side of it, what do you think? What could be done to help capital flow into towards clean energy? What do you think? How can these guys get more money? That's what we're asking.
Yeah, we should. Well, one of the things that I recently learned, and I think it's quite exciting, is, for instance, Schneider is helping about 1,000 suppliers become net zero, half their emissions and whatnot by 2025. So, of course, that's not just a one-off thing. It's the start of a journey. So I think there are so many initiatives that even I am not completely up to speed yet. It's about, as I think Caroline mentioned, it's about helping people help us, right? Nobody has the time to go too deep, but everybody wants to do the right investments and right returns. So, yeah, very happy to do my best to help. Yeah.
Yes, Caroline, what do you, because you had a good view on, a good understanding of what you felt needed to be done, but how do you feel you can encourage more money to flow into the clean energy sector?
That's a great question. I think there are interesting governmental initiatives that I do think help. Like in the United States, there's ways that investments into clean energy tech can be multiplied, for instance, through investment tax credits or so forth. I think there's also clean energy loans, for instance, in the United States, that I think can be a compelling way to motivate investors to see a return on their investment or feel like the risk is reduced. Maybe, Imrat, you want to speak a little more?
Back to you.
Thank you, Deborah. Great, it's working. So yeah, from my perspective, there are a couple of things that we could change. I think one of the great things that we could do is sort of relook at state aid legislation that's in the UK. So for those who don't know, there are caps on how much money can be invested directly by government in technologies. And I think sort of if the government were able to do more and it wasn't sort of at below cost intervention rates, that would make a huge difference because it helps de-risk then for the private sector. And I think that as a nation we could take much more pride in the companies that are doing really great things, and there's a whole piece there around sort of being able to then protect and safeguard those for the future as well. So I think there's a lot of things policy-wise that the government could do. I think there's also sort of the things for investors as well, where more and more funds are becoming specialized, and so it's a classic sort of supply and demand equation where if there's more demand for it, the supply will come as well. So we're going to see that as more and more natural disasters happen, as sort of the pace of change needs to increase, then naturally will be more investment coming into this sector.
Actually, you raise an interesting point about the balance between private and public capital. Do you think the balance is right at the moment? I'm guessing from your answer that you think that the public sector could probably do more to encourage or to match or to generate funds. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of support already from the public sector. So there's a whole raft of sort of grant programs that are available. I think it's helping to get the investment culture to a place where we can embrace risk better. I think to the sort of the US point, it's so much more risk-friendly in the US than it is in the UK. I guess the difference is in the US it's sort of optimized for big returns. In the UK it's optimized to minimize losses. And I think if we were able to take a riskier approach, that would probably generate better results for the long run.
And do you find, Caroline, I'll ask you this one, in terms of the follow-up funding, I sometimes feel within the UK we actually do startups quite well. You know, we encourage startups. Follow-on funding can get more difficult. And of course, which is odd, because you think, right, we've done it, we've got concept, we're ready to go, where's the money? Is that something you've come across, and does that happen in the US, or do you, and I'm going to ask you in a minute if you recognize that?
Yeah, I'd say so, that it happens probably everywhere where there's this kind of, well, I can't remember I think there's a specific term for it, but there's kind of this valley of death after a lot of people are willing to put in a little bit of money in seed funding and, you know, to have kind of a bite at the apple of a potentially high return, but they don't have the appetite to really do and again, I think it goes back to feeling incompetent to do significant due diligence once it gets to that time that, you know, they really would have to invest more capital. I wanted to echo what Amrit said. I think it's even interesting. It's interesting how culture plays a role. And I can't speak to the UK. I'm not here. Our company's not based here. But I would say even between the West Coast of the United States and the East Coast of the United States, we've said the exact same thing you're saying, which is capital tends to minimize downside on the East Coast more so than think about the potential upside and how much they want to be a part of that. And I think that there's almost no accounting for that, and how do you encourage that culture among investors? I think when investors see California investors, for instance, do well, maybe that encourages that. I do think hard tech has seen a boom in the last 10 years or so. Investors are more willing to have, as you were mentioning, Deedham, longer term returns. A lot of that's kind of become reclusive in the last couple of years, but I have some optimism that it will return. I do think that deregulation could help investors worry less about the risk of regulatory risk in the energy sector.
Deregulation, yeah. Okay. And that's interesting because I don't know if you know, I did a podcast called The Big Green Money Show, and at the end of The Big Green Money Show, it's talking to huge organisations right down to SMEs. And at the end of the Big Green Money Show, I always said, what is it that you want? You know, what is it that you... And actually, they were talking about, they wanted legislation. They wanted a structure that they understood long-term they were working to. Would you agree with that?
So for me, if I had a magic wand and I could...
I'm now going to ask you the magic wand question in a minute. You can't answer that now.
Okay, so what would I want? Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think if we could make it easier to make investment happen, and also accessible as well. I think there's still this massive gulf in the capital that's available to female entrepreneurs, to entrepreneurs from ethnic minorities. It's a fraction of the capital that goes in. I mean, there was a report, US based, but the UK is not that dissimilar, where it was less than 2% of invested capital went to ethnic minority and female founders. I think it's about 10% in the UK, but that's still a fraction of where it really needs to be, because we are all human. We live together on this planet. It takes ideas from all sectors to make it work. And if we're only putting capital in one section of the market, we're never going to have a solution that works for everyone. So in my view, if we can make capital more accessible, make it easier to make investment happen, and really kind of get away from this idea that failure is a bad thing and reduce the effect of failure, that'd be great.
And Deedham, I want to talk to you about, you talked about mindset, which I think is really important. And also, you know, Caroline, talking about the understanding. How can you get an investor to invest if they fundamentally don't get it? So Didem, how do you think we can change mindset? I mean, that's a big thing. That's a big thing in a nation or a group of investors, and that is a big question. But how do you think we could go about that?
I think it's education, really. It's not technology. It's not this. It's not government. It's really education, because at least experiencing, we are all hopefully good citizens or trying to be good citizens here. But when I look at my son or the young generations, it's natural for them. I mean, for us, it's almost like I need to think. For them, it's a given. And that's because of education, I feel. That's why everything, to me, comes back to our education systems, that sustainability first mindset, instilled from young age works much better.
So, you're going to get your magic wand moment. But you've got time to think. Amrit's got his ready. You've got a magic wand. What would it get for you?
So, to the point Didem just made about children, I have 2 young children. I have one that's 2 months old. I have one that's 3 years old. And the thought that they will face challenges in their lifetime, which I can only sort of imagine, is truly horrifying. Everything I do for them and for all the other children out there as well, because this is the next generation will be suffering for anything that we do not do or we choose to do. If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing, I would change the way that we value companies. Because at the moment, we value companies purely on their financial performance.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I would love to see the markets, the public markets, the private markets, value companies based on the financial return they generate, of course, but also the environmental return and the societal return, or the nature return that they're able to generate. Because surely we should be looking at the companies we invest in and the pension funds invest in and think, aren't they really there for the future? And do the companies that are currently the most valuable, are they truly the most valuable, or are they detracting from the world that we live in? So I imagine it'd probably be incredibly painful to do it. But if we could get to that place, that would be amazing.
Thank you. Wonderful magic wand wish. It's your wish next.
Thank you. Deborah, I'll be honest, there's no magic, but I do think everything is possible.
Is there no magic? Don't tell me there's no magic. You're going to be telling me there's no Father Christmas next.
I am an optimistic person. So as I mentioned about, for instance, girls in AI, increasing diversity in technology and so on, it does happen one step at a time. Grassroots efforts work, education works, and people like this audience joins forces. That's the only magic. So for me, I would start indeed with education, and truthful education, not memorizing things, not just ticking boxes, but real future forward-looking education.
Yeah, well, education embeds it into the
Exactly.
everyday living, doesn't it? Absolutely right. A wonderful wish. Caroline, it's yours. Your magic wand.
Thank you for giving me time to think about that. It's interesting because I find my mind going to, even though I believe that consumers and businesses have to actually do the activities that make things happen, I think ultimately my magic wand would be is that either all the governments of the world, or at least some leading governments of the world, not just make commitments, but actually think backwards on what would actually have to happen in what times to actually meet those commitments, and really think about being in a global moonshot position, and basically remove or figure out what regulatory barriers exist to keep us from being in a better world. So it's interesting because a lot of our regulatory barriers are set up to, help, I think, society or the planet, but in some cases we may have to change those in order to really rapidly deploy things that is needed to decarbonize.
And as you say, rapidly, because we don't have time. I always say to people, we can do this. Human beings are amazing. This is a room full of amazing people who can do amazing things. The question is, have we the will? And have we the will to do it fast enough? That's my question. I think there were 3 wonderful wishes, and I think you've been 3 fantastic panelists. I've been absolutely fascinated. Thank you very much for coming on and chatting with us all. Amrit, Didem, Caroline.
Well, thank you.